There is a figure that walks beside you. You do not speak to it, you do not name it, but it knows your every thought. It watches when you smile, and it whispers when you sleep. You call yourself good, you call yourself conscious, but this figure knows better. It holds every impulse you denied, every truth you betrayed, every rage you swallowed, and every desire you disowned. You are not alone in your soul. The shadow lives there, and until you turn toward it, it will rule you from behind your back. You say you want to be free. Then listen closely, because I will show you what happens when a man refuses to see what he has become. This is not a lecture. It is a warning. And if you walk away now, the shadow will walk with you, silently, invisibly, unconsciously, until one day it will wear your name. You stand before a dark mirror. It shows no reflection. There is only the blackness of unlit depth, a hollow that neither absorbs nor returns your gaze. You turn away, but it whispers, not in sound, but in something older than sound, and it whispers your name. This is the beginning, not of light, but of recognition. The soul does not unfold through self-flattery, nor by the righteousness of its own gaze. The soul begins where the ego falters. It begins where one stops pretending that what is hidden can be excused, erased, or ignored. The black mirror is not the devil. It is the image of all that you are, but cannot yet bear to see. The shadow is that part of the psyche which a man will not claim. It is his moral inferiority, his secret envy, his cruelty, his cowardice, his compulsions. It is also the root of his truth, his vitality, and his lost gods. But it begins always as the thing he refuses to be. Most do not meet the shadow willingly. They avoid it through moral posturing, excessive obedience, or endless distraction. They make themselves good, not from fullness, but from fear. They believe virtue will save them from the darkness. But what is denied in consciousness does not vanish. It grows teeth in the unconscious, and it bites through projection. The shadow is not evil in itself. The shadow is made evil by our refusal to see it. Evil is not born from what is dark, but from what is unconscious. Where there is light, the shadow softens. Where there is blindness, it becomes feral. Repression creates violence, denial becomes possession, and the one who refuses the shadow becomes its instrument. This is why I wrote, what is not made conscious will be lived as fate. It is not a metaphor, it is a law. There is no better dramatization of this than in Goethe's Faust. Faust is the scholar, the seeker, the man of light who longs for meaning beyond the intellect. Mephistopheles appears not as a horned demon, but as a figure of insight, irony, and seduction. He is Faust's double. He offers knowledge, ecstasy, power, but only because Faust already desired these things in his depths. Mephistopheles does not corrupt Faust. He reveals him. Every Mephistopheles is born in the psyche that refuses to integrate. The one who has not faced the shadow must dance with it in disguise. Modern man prides himself on rationality. He speaks of progress, technology, democracy. He imagines he is awake. But look beneath the surface. There is war, hatred, fragmentation. Why? Because man has banished half his soul. He has identified with light, and so the darkness acts autonomously. The more we moralize without reflection, the more we split the psyche. And this splitting breeds projection. What I cannot tolerate in myself, I begin to see everywhere around me. I become blind to the evil in my own hand while condemning it in the hand of the neighbor. When we repress our own shadow, we inevitably project it onto others, onto our enemies, our rivals, our spouses, our nations, our gods. We make scapegoats of strangers and saints of ourselves, but there are no saints, only whole men or divided ones. In the Black Book I wrote, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. There is no awakening without descent, no wholeness without the black mirror. We fear evil outside of us, yet the greatest evil is the refusal to look within. That refusal kills slowly. It kills not with guns, but with despair. It withers the soul, it sterilizes the imagination, and it leaves behind a civilization of personas, refined masks covering vacant eyes. You ask why you repeat the same mistakes, why your relationships fail, why your life collapses into compulsions. It is because your shadow lives, acts, speaks, but you have never invited it to your table. You push it further into the basement, and there it sharpens its teeth. This is the warning. You will either integrate the shadow or it will integrate you. There is no neutral ground. You must sit with it, speak to it, allow it to show its images, no matter how grotesque. You must cease the game of pretending that you are only what others admire. What you admire in yourself is not the whole. What you fear is not the enemy. There is no ethics without shadow work. There is only obedience. And obedience without consciousness is the seed of evil. It is not enough to be good. You must be whole. In ancient alchemy, there is no gold without the blackening. The negredo must come. The soul must rot, ferment, descend. Only then can it be transmuted. Light that has never touched darkness is not light. It is illusion. So when the mirror turns black, do not turn away. When the whisper comes, do not silence it. When the image that frightens you most appears in your dream, do not banish it. That is your beginning. That is where your soul waits. That is where you begin to become. The soul has many tricks to avoid its own depth, but among the most dangerous is projection. What I do not face within, I will see without. That which I reject in my own heart becomes the object of my hatred in the world. The more unbearable the trait, the more quickly I find it in others. And what I call truth is often just my unconscious shadow, painted upon another's face. Projection is the soul's camouflage. It hides the wound beneath judgment. It masks unconscious fear as moral certainty. But all projection is exile. It casts out a part of the self in order to preserve the fiction of wholeness. You say, I am not like that. But the moment you say it with contempt, you are. The enemy, the other, the foreigner, the fool, the heretic, these are often not real adversaries, but mirrors. Each carries a piece of what you could not integrate. You made yourself clean by making them unclean. But in doing so, you handed them your shadow. This is not speculation. It is a law of the psyche. Whenever a person feels a disproportionate intensity towards someone else, rage, revulsion, fear, obsession, they are likely facing a projection. The trait they see is real, but its intensity reveals its source, not the object, but the subject. In war, projection is no longer individual. It becomes collective. Entire nations become infected by the shadow they have not integrated. What is suppressed in the soul becomes acted out in history. I saw this in the rise of Nazi Germany. I do not speak from a distance. I speak from deep observation. The German people projected their internal chaos, humiliation, and fear onto the figure of the other, first the foreigner, then the Jew, then anyone who challenged the collective image of purity and order. This was not only political, it was archetypal. The German soul, wounded and split, identified itself with light and glory and cast all darkness into its enemies. But the shadow cannot be destroyed. It returns with fire. Mass movements, moral crusades, and ideological certainty are often the masks of the shadow. The more righteous the tone, the more unconscious the content. A man who joins a cause to feel pure may be using the group to hide his personal chaos. A woman who condemns others for being unspiritual may be avoiding her own hunger for power. This is not hypocrisy, it is projection. But projection destroys the possibility of individuation. You cannot become a whole person while casting your fragments onto others. You cannot follow the path of the soul while banishing half of it. What we project, we do not own. And what we do not own becomes autonomous. Many relationships collapse under the weight of shadow projection. Lovers become parents, saviors, or devils because the inner figures have not been seen. The partner becomes the stage for your unlived life, and the love you think is deep is merely need rooted in blindness. The first task of the mature soul is to reclaim its projections, not all at once, but consciously, symbolically, courageously. This is why I warned. What I hate in others reveals what I have not dared to see in myself. You must ask, what is it in that man that unsettles me? What is it in her that I cannot forgive? What does this emotion say, not about them, but about me? When this question is asked with honesty, the shadow begins to recede. It does not vanish, but it ceases to rule from behind the eyes. The difficulty is that the shadow rarely appears as it is. It disguises itself. It dresses in costumes of religion, politics, virtue. It often sounds like a moral voice, but its true tone is compulsion. There is no freedom in it, only reaction. This is why ethics without psychology is dangerous. Conscience must be rooted in the whole psyche, not just in rules or approval. The man who follows commandments but has not confronted his own darkness is often the first to become a monster when the rules collapse. Projection does not require hatred. It can manifest as idealization. The guru, the artist, the political leader, these are often figures upon whom we cast our unlived greatness. We call it love, but it is need disguised as reverence. The soul cannot grow until it reclaims both shadow and gold from the other. You must take back the devil and the God you have projected. You must say, this darkness is mine, this light is mine, now I begin. In dreams, projection often appears as a crowd, a mob, or a faceless accuser. The dream ego feels hunted, judged, exposed. This reveals the psyche's call to withdraw from the outer world and confront its inner audience. Only when the crowd is faced in silence can the soul speak. To reclaim a projection is not to excuse others. It is to refuse to live unconsciously. It is to say, I will not make you carry what is mine. I will bear it, suffer it, and integrate it. The path of individuation is narrow. It requires that we gather the parts of ourselves we gave away in fear. So the next time you feel righteous anger, ask, what in me does this echo? When you are enchanted by someone's charisma, ask, what greatness have I denied in myself? When you are consumed by judgment, ask, what shame have I not yet named? Only then can the soul become honest. Only then can the self emerge, not as mask, but as center. The path to the self does not ascend in a straight line. It descends, it winds, it loses its light. The descent is not punishment, it is preparation. The soul, like seed, must fall before it can rise. But the modern mind has forgotten how to fall with reverence. It fears the underworld, calls it depression, chaos, failure. But the unconscious knows the truth. The descent is a nikaya, a night sea journey through the black waters of psychic transformation. To truly meet the shadow, one must lose their standing in the known. All images of oneself, noble, competent, spiritual, strong, must collapse. The descent begins when the ego is disoriented, and it is here, in the fragmentation, that something deeper begins to stir. This is why descent so often begins in dreams. The dream rarely shows the shadow as it is. It appears grotesque, absurd, uncanny. The shadow comes in costumes to disarm the ego, to bypass its defenses. A patient once described a dream in which he was chased by a clown with bleeding eyes. At first he was terrified, but in analysis we discovered it was not a demon. It was his own lost laughter, distorted through years of repression. He had silenced joy to survive his childhood, and now it returned, asking to be seen. The shadow is not simply negative. It is everything that has been rejected. Joy can be exiled, desire can be buried, rage and radiance are sent into the same tomb. The descent brings all of it back, not neatly, but wildly. This is the meaning of the ancient myths. The descent of Inanna into the underworld. She is stripped at each gate of her jewels, robes, and symbols of power. At the end, she stands naked before her dark sister Ereshkigal and is struck dead. Why? Because rebirth requires annihilation of the false. The ego must die for the soul to breathe. In Christianity, Judas is not merely a betrayer. He is the catalyst of descent. He is the shadow of Christ. Without Judas, there is no crucifixion. Without crucifixion, there is no resurrection. The soul does not grow by ascending the moral ladder. It grows by being broken open by truth. I have often spoken of the trickster. The trickster is the primitive shadow, the absurd, chaotic figure who disrupts all order. He is the coyote in Native American myth, the Loki of Norse tradition, the fox spirit of East Asia. The trickster is not evil. He is the necessary force that undoes pride, exposes delusion, and restores balance through disorientation. In modern life, the trickster appears when one becomes too sure, too good, too holy. He enters as accident, as failure, as embarrassment. But behind him stands the self, whispering, now that your mask has fallen, shall we begin? A patient once described a recurring dream. He walks into a great cathedral to receive an award, but as he steps forward, he trips and his clothes fall away. The crowd gasps. He feels shame so profound that he wants to die. But then a child steps out of the shadows and hands him a black stone. The dream did not reward his success. It initiated him through fall, through nakedness, through loss. The black stone was his self, compact, dense, heavy with truth. This is how the descent works. It strips you, not to punish, but to cleanse. To descend is to become unsure. It is to let go of the narrative. It is to allow the unconscious to speak in its own language, symbol, image, paradox. The modern man resists dissent. He calls it breakdown. He medicates it, rationalizes it, moralizes it. But what he calls breakdown is often breakthrough if he can listen. The dissent is where you meet the parts of yourself that were never allowed to live, the one who wanted to scream, the one who needed to be held, the one who believed in beauty but was laughed at. These parts are not gone. They are waiting below. You must go down to find them. You must leave the known. You must walk into the dark mirror and say, "Show me what I abandoned to survive." And the mirror will show you not a monster, but a child, not a demon, but a dancer, not an enemy, but the forgotten friend of your own soul. This is the work, not to rise, but to descend, not to explain, but to suffer, not to conquer, but to feel. The ego will call it death, but it is not death. It is descent. It is the necessary fall before the true ascent. Myth does not lie. Myth reveals what the modern world has forgotten, that the soul grows roots before it grows wings. So if you feel lost, do not panic. If you feel broken, listen. If you feel as though the ground is falling away beneath your feet, go with it. The way down is the way through. The way through is the way in. When the shadow is not met consciously, it does not disappear. It grows in power and autonomy. And when it grows strong enough, it begins to act, not from the unconscious, but through the ego itself. This is possession. Possession is not theatrical. It is not a spinning head or a haunted face. It is far more common and far more dangerous. It appears whenever the ego is no longer in dialogue with the whole psyche, when one identifies wholly with one side of the inner polarity and casts the other into darkness. A man becomes possessed when his moral superiority blinds him to his cruelty. A woman becomes possessed when her need to be needed suffocates those she claims to love. A culture becomes possessed when it no longer questions its values, no longer reflects on its history, no longer tolerates contradiction. The possessed man does not know he is possessed. That is the curse. He believes he is guided by truth, when in fact he is gripped by a complex and autonomous psychic system that feeds on his blindness. Possession often manifests through inflation. Inflation is not self-esteem. It is the ego swelling with archetypal force. The individual begins to act as if he were a god or a devil. He loses proportion. He no longer sees others as real. He no longer suffers himself as limited. He becomes a mouthpiece for the unconscious and calls it virtue. This is why those who are most certain are often the most dangerous. They speak from a place of total conviction, but beneath that voice is an unmet wound, and beneath that wound is the shadow, rejected, raging, and now wearing the face of righteousness. I have seen this in the pages of history. I saw it in the rise of collective movements that demanded purity and brought only destruction. When crowds march in hatred, when regimes demand obedience without conscience, when ideologies claim perfection, the shadow has taken power. The devil no longer wears horns. He wears a white robe. He smiles. He quotes scripture. He speaks of justice and healing, but leaves corpses in his wake. This is the terrible irony. The shadow often appears most strongly where the light is proclaimed most loudly. It is in the pursuit of purity that we become impure. It is in the worship of goodness that we become blind to our evil. It is in the refusal to be human that we become monsters. A woman once came to me convinced she was the moral center of her family. She gave endlessly, served endlessly, forgave endlessly, but her children feared her. In dreams, she appeared as a queen with iron hands. Through analysis, we uncovered a vast reservoir of rage, never spoken, never allowed. Her goodness was not false, but it was incomplete, and the part of her that was not lived had begun to live without her. To deny the shadow is to give it license to act in secret. The possessed personality cannot love. It cannot truly relate. It can only use. Others become mirrors, props, enemies. There is no dialogue, only domination. This is the meaning of Christ's warning. First, remove the beam from your own eye. It is not a call to perfection. It is a call to self-confrontation. Until the shadow is seen, every judgment is projection. Every cause is corruption. Jung once wrote, "The man who believes himself good must examine what his goodness is defending. What are you refusing to feel? What are you protecting from view? What mask do you wear to avoid the mirror?" To be clear, the shadow is not the opposite of good. It is the other half of wholeness. It is the vitality that was deemed unfit. It is the sexuality that was repressed. It is the anger that was shamed. It is the power that was feared. When these energies are not integrated, they return, but they return twisted. A man who represses his desire becomes obsessed with control. A woman who denies her power becomes manipulative. A society that disowns its history begins to relive it in darker form. Possession is not fate. It is the result of neglect. What we do not tend within will one day erupt without. What we do not admit becomes what we act out. What we exile becomes what we attack. This is why I say, when I deny the shadow, I invite it to wear my face. You will see it in your rage. You will see it in your contempt. You will see it in the voices that mock, in the fantasies that disturb, in the dreams that chase. These are not mistakes. They are messages. To avoid possession, one must descend consciously. One must feel what was forbidden. One must weep where one once laughed and laugh where one once feared. One must become human, not perfect, but whole. The soul cannot be split without consequence. The more you push your darkness away, the closer it comes, not as friend, but as thief, not as guide, but as tyrant. So when the shadow knocks, do not run, do not moralize, do not pretend. Listen, sit, ask, what do you want from me? What have I not dared to feel? What life have I denied you? And the answer is your medicine. It is a dreadful thing to confront the shadow, but it is an even more dreadful thing to refuse it. For what we do not meet within becomes the very fate that breaks us from without. Yet integration is not an act of heroism. It is a burden, a sacred burden. To take back what you once rejected is to carry the full weight of your own soul. I have said elsewhere, to confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light. But this is no sentimental light. It is a light born of darkness. It burns only when the psyche has suffered itself, without excuse, without blame, without disguise. The shadow is not integrated by cleverness, analysis, or spiritual bypass. It is integrated through dialogue, patient, brutal, intimate dialogue with what was once exiled. To begin this dialogue, you must ask, what did I cast away in order to survive? What part of me did I murder to be accepted? Often, the answer comes not in words, but in images. In dreams, we see the shadow as the animal, the criminal, the grotesque figure in the basement, the wounded child in the attic. The soul speaks in symbol because it cannot speak in lies. It tells the truth by evocation, not explanation. A man once came to me, tormented by recurring dreams of wolves drowning in black water. At first, he feared them, but the dreams repeated, and the wolves began to look at him, not with menace, but with grief. Through the work of analysis, he began to remember the rage he had buried, the violence he had inherited, the sorrow he had never allowed. The wolves were not his enemies, they were his brothers, his unwept dead. When he wept for them, the dreams changed. The wolves swam beside him. The water was no longer poison, it became baptism. This is how the work begins. The integration of the shadow is not moral, it is symbolic. It requires that we hold what we most wish to destroy, not to justify, but to understand, not to act out, but to redeem. This is the paradox. You do not conquer the shadow. You carry it like a crocodile across your back. You learn its rhythms, its breath, its hunger. You let it walk beside you, and slowly you come to see it was not a monster. It was a part of your own nature, distorted by fear, buried by shame. We see this in the myths. Jacob wrestles with the angel through the night. He is wounded, but refuses to let go. At dawn, he receives a new name, not as reward, but as transformation. The wound is the initiation. The struggle is the blessing. In Egypt, the god Horus must confront Set, the god of chaos and darkness. They battle, and Horus loses an eye, but in that wound lies vision. The eye that sees inward is opened only by confrontation. This is what the alchemists called the conjunctio, the union of opposites, achieved not by domination, but by enduring the tension between them. The ego must stand between the light and the dark, and not flee to either side. It must suffer the opposites until a third thing emerges. This third thing is not compromise. It is not a balance. It is transformation. It is a new being, born of the struggle, the self. But to reach this, one must endure contradiction. A woman once came to me, ashamed of her ambition. She had always been nice, always supportive, always humble. But in her dreams, she was a queen surrounded by lions. She was ashamed of the dream, ashamed of the voice inside her that wanted to lead, to command, to shine. But that voice was not arrogance. It was her unlived strength. We worked together. Slowly, she began to speak with that inner queen, not to worship her, but to welcome her, to carry her. And in doing so, she changed, not into someone else, but into someone whole. This is the cost of integration. To feel again what you silenced, to face what you became to survive, to bear the full spectrum of your humanity. And it is also the gift. When the shadow is integrated, vitality returns. The libido flows back into consciousness. Creativity awakens. Relationships deepen. The compulsions loosen. One begins to feel not simply better, but more real. This is not relief. It is resurrection. You must be willing to suffer what you have avoided. You must learn to hold contradiction. You must stop asking for permission to be whole. This is why shadow work is not popular. It cannot be packaged. It cannot be rushed. It requires solitude, patience, humility. It requires that you become your own mirror. So when the darkness rises, do not panic. When the dream terrifies, do not escape. When the memory returns, do not numb it. Sit, listen, say to the shadow, I see you. I do not run. I am ready to carry what is mine. Then the work begins. The darkness that you once feared, that you denied, projected, or silenced, when finally met in truth, no longer appears as threat. It appears as potential. What once seemed only to destroy begins to reveal its deeper nature. It is the carrier of your unlived life. In this, the paradox of the shadow becomes visible. It is not only the keeper of wounds, it is the keeper of power. This is the great secret of the unconscious. It hides not only terror, but treasure. The parts of you that you banished were never only primitive, dangerous, or shameful. They were also alive. They contained libido, the raw force of psychic life. In rejecting the shadow, you rejected not only what was intolerable, but what was essential. That is why so many who deny the shadow become pale, brittle, exhausted. They are not safe. They are severed. The shadow is instinct, drive, desire, intuition. It is the roar beneath the smile, the fire beneath the discipline, the chaos beneath the mask. When these energies are excluded, they do not die. They turn, they rot, they leak into behavior, they haunt the body. But when they are welcomed, not indulged but seen, they become vitality. This is not permission for regression. To integrate the shadow is not to act it out. It is to transform it into something symbolic, creative, and true. Power that is unintegrated is destructive, but power that is seen, held, and owned becomes medicine. Think of the alchemists. They began with nigredo, the blackening, the rot, the darkness. Without this, nothing could begin. The prima materia, base, wild, offensive, was necessary. Without it, there was nothing to purify. No gold could be born unless the darkness was endured. And so they did not flee from the shadow. They studied it, they cooked it, they bore its heat. The same is true for the psyche. A man once came to me, terrified of his rage. He was polite, generous, admired. But beneath it, he carried the wound of humiliation, buried, festering. He had spent his life avoiding conflict. But his dreams were filled with fire, with battles, with knives. At first, he feared he was a monster. But I said, no, not a monster. Only a man who has never been allowed to feel his strength. Through analysis, he began to welcome the rage, not to act it, but to know it. He came to see that beneath his anger was grief, and beneath that grief was power. The power to say no, the power to act, the power to be a full self. That is the work, to find the seed within the darkness. Nietzsche understood this. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. He did not glorify chaos, he endured it. And in that endurance, he touched something vast. He became more than his culture, more than his time, more than his mask. He became an individual. The shadow is the root of the self. To be clear, the self is not found by rising above the world. It is found by going through it, through the muck, the grief, the contradiction, the fear. Only there does the true center begin to emerge. The danger is in those who cling to one-sided morality. They wish to be good, only good, always good. But their goodness is brittle, it breaks in crisis, it turns cruel when tested, because it is not wholeness, it is avoidance. We see this in the priest who cannot admit his desire, in the activist who cannot face their hate, in the healer who cannot speak their exhaustion. They shine with light, but it is a false light, disconnected from the body, from instinct, from shadow. To integrate the shadow is to recover your eros, your strength, your wildness. You do not become sinful, you become real. A woman came to me once, exhausted by a life of service. She dreamed of a snake coiled around her stomach. She woke terrified, but the snake was not there to kill her. It was there to awaken her. It was her own life force, curled, waiting, angry, to be ignored. We worked together. Slowly, she began to speak differently, walk differently. She set boundaries. She said yes with her whole body. She said no without apology. The snake did not leave. It began to dance. That is the gift of shadow work. You retrieve what you left behind. You make sacred what was once profane. You bless what you were told to curse. And in doing so, you become whole, not perfect, but alive. The world does not need more virtue. It needs more wholeness. More individuals who have faced their own darkness and come back bearing gifts, not slogans, but soul. This is not easy, but it is sacred. There is a danger greater than the individual's refusal to meet their shadow. It is the danger that the collective does the same. When a culture denies its darkness, it becomes unconscious of itself. And what is unconscious always returns, not as insight, but as catastrophe. I have said this plainly. The more the unconscious is excluded, the more powerful it becomes. This is not superstition. It is psychological law. What we do not admit festers beneath the surface, gathering energy, waiting for its hour. In the modern world, we have made the shadow nearly illegal. We worship light, progress, efficiency. We build systems of control. We polish our images and condemn all that is irrational, ugly, unruly. But the psyche cannot be ruled by reason alone. It has its own ecology, its own necessity. In the name of morality, we exile the immoral. In the name of purity, we demonize desire. In the name of truth, we silence contradiction. But this is not virtue, it is repression. And repression, when scaled across a civilization, becomes fate. I warned against this in the 20th century. I saw what happened when an entire nation projected its darkness onto a scapegoat, when collective fear and unacknowledged inferiority were channeled into hatred, ideology, and war. That was not politics, it was possession. The shadow had taken power, and the world bled. What is happening now is no different in structure. Our civilization is fragmenting, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it lacks soul. Depression, addiction, meaningless violence, these are not personal failures. They are signs of a collective psyche cut off from its roots. We live in a time of artificial light, but very little vision. We have opinions, but no reflection. We have movements, but no center. Without the shadow, there is no soul. And without the soul, there is no future. The final warning is this. If we do not make the shadow conscious, it will make itself known in ways that destroy. A patient once sent me a dream. He was not educated in psychology. He knew little of my work, but his dream shook me. He saw the earth split open. Fire poured from the cracks. The sky turned black, and from the center of the world rose a great figure, half man, half beast. It looked at him and said, "You would not speak to me, so now I must act." This is not merely personal. It is symbolic of our time. We have refused dialogue with the depths. We have silenced myth, ritual, imagination. We have exiled the archetypes to entertainment and dismissed dreams as noise, and so the psyche begins to revolt. The return of the repressed is never gentle. It comes as breakdown, as extremism, as disintegration. But this fate is not necessary. There is another way. The individual must begin, not by fixing the world, but by making themselves whole, not by preaching to others, but by descending into their own night. If enough individuals undertake this path, the culture begins to shift, not by revolution, but by radiation. A man or woman who has integrated their shadow does not need to control. They do not need to attack. They do not need to convince. Their very being changes the field. Wholeness is contagious, but it must be earned. This final part of the journey is not glamorous. It is not about power. It is about humility, about the courage to say, "I do not yet know myself. I have hidden from what I am, but I am willing now." That willingness is the threshold. We must restore the place of the symbolic in our lives. We must return to dreams, not as distractions, but as revelations. We must face the figures in our myths, not as stories, but as mirrors. The self does not demand perfection. It demands reality. It asks only this: will you look into the mirror that shows your whole face? Will you bear what you see? Will you stay with it long enough for it to transform? Because the shadow is not an end, it is a gate. And behind that gate is your soul. Behind that gate is the future of our civilization. Behind that gate is the possibility that we do not have to repeat the disasters of history, but may instead become something new. Not through avoidance, but through integration.